That's like the worst when audio goes like that too. I know that's annoying. Okay, great. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about our two main documents, which are the exclusive right to sell and also our offer to purchase, both of which were updated recently in the last couple of months. And then just any questions that you have along the way, feel free either to like raise your hand in Zoom or unmute yourself and just let me know what your questions are. So I have, for the purposes of this class, just put those two documents into a loop. And so I'm going to go ahead and open these. Okay. So our exclusive right to sell agreement. We love listings, so this is a very important one for us to know. So the first paragraph, obviously, seller, that would be your client in this case. That is them as owner or having the lawful right and power to act for the following property. So that would be a situation if it were an executor or something of that nature, or a power of attorney where there was somebody else who's not technically the owner who is in charge of the property. Hereby authorizes Solon Real Estate LLC, Keller Williams Living, the sole and exclusive right to offer the property for sale on the price and terms outlined below, or such other terms as may be agreed. So here's where you'll put your property address, the city where it's located, your listing price, beginning on. So this is important. This is the actual day that it's going to go live in the multiple listing service. So so say you took a listing today, but they don't want it to be listed until the 26th of November. You would put November 26th. And then in terms of an expiration date, I tend to do 6 months. Sometimes people will push, well, why can't I just do it for 3? And my reasoning with that is always, if a transaction is delayed, you'd have to re-sign all of the paperwork, and 3 months makes that a little bit of a tighter situation. And so I usually do about 6 months, a year, if it is a property that I think may have some trouble selling, or if it's like a luxury property or something like that, where you're going to be investing a lot more resources, maybe, then I would recommend trying to get that year locked down. In this market, we don't really see things sitting that long, but just if that fits the situation, then it's worth a shot. Exclusive right to sell and compensation. In consideration of broker's agreement to work to secure a buyer for the property, seller grants the broker sole and exclusive right to the property. Seller shall refer all real estate licensees or prospects who contact them directly. And basically that's what that's saying, is that's protecting you to make sure that it doesn't get sold from under you. In the event of a sale or exchange of the property at the price and terms stated, or such other price and terms that are acceptable, this is where you'll put the total commission. So let's just, for this particular property, let's say that it is a 7% commission. So you'll type the word 7 in here, and then you will do the numeral 7 of the full purchase price or exchange price and $200. So some of us who are on teams may have a different number here, but for the office, for all of us independent agents, it is $200, and that is that additional commission, which is listed out also in our purchase agreement, or a minimum fee. So depending on the purchase price of the property, like say this was like maybe a $60,000 property, in that case, I always recommend putting a minimum fee, just because with percentages, sometimes it can end up a little bit lower than what you would want your minimum to be. And so we don't have a minimum for our office that is required. But for me personally, I always put something if it's like a lower priced property, just to make sure that I will be getting paid, basically. Does that make sense to everybody? So typically, if it's above 100,000, I just do not applicable, because it's whichever one is greater. So the foregoing commission shall be paid through escrow at title transfer in the event of any sale or of the property within 6 months after the expiration. So if it sells 6 months after to anyone who knew about it during the contract period. So during the time that you have it listed, if somebody doesn't put an offer in, then comes back, technically that seller still owes you the commission. Seller shall not be obligated to pay said commission if the seller enters into a bona fide written exclusive right to sell agreement with another real estate brokerage during the protection period. So if you have it listed and for some reason or another, you and the seller decide to part ways, if they list immediately with another brokerage and it sells, then you are not entitled to anything at that point. Cooperation. Broker shall extend an offer of compensation for cooperation in the amount of, and this is where you would put your co-broke. So whether that's 3% on the first 100,000, 2% on the remainder, or if it's 3 or whatever that might be. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, authorization to market. Don't fall asleep on me. I know this is kind of dry material, but it's super important. I might start asking people to read. During this agreement and any extensions of it, the seller grants the broker sole and exclusive right to publish and grant to others the right to publish any and all descriptive information about the property, print, video, audio, photographic, electronic descriptions. This is basically the part that allows us to do our job and to sell the property for the seller, subject to MLS rules and regulations. This says that we're allowed to do photography, drone photographs, and that they can be digitized, reproduced, published, broadcast, disseminated, etc., etc. The seller releases the broker and everyone involved with the brokerage of all liability arising from or related to access for showings and the use, distribution, publication, or display of any property information. And that you can put a sign in the yard, a lockbox on the door, and that the sellers agree to provide reasonable access to show to prospective buyers or tenants. And also that this is new in the most recent version of this, that they authorize third parties such as inspectors and appraisers to access the property by lockbox or other means with advance consent. So the best practice around this is still, if you have an appraiser who would like to get in and for some reason you're not able to meet them, I personally feel that it is the best practice to go to the appraisal if at all possible. Some appraisers don't really like that. So if there's some reason why you're not able to be there, then I recommend emailing directly, talking to the seller and then saying, I'm going to email you asking for written permission for these people to be able to access your property on this day at this time. And then make sure that you have that in writing just to protect you. Fair housing, this is a very important paragraph that's in every single document that we have. Nothing has changed there, and I don't feel like I need to read it because we all know that we don't discriminate based on any of the protected classes. Seller disclosures. So there are some new verbiage in here as well. Seller understands that the broker is relying on the seller to provide information about the property. The seller will look at and review the MLS listing to confirm its accuracy and immediately notify in writing of any errors or omissions. So that's important. Make sure that you have your client review the listing to make sure that they don't see anything inaccurate. So if you have in there that it's central air because you just thought that there was an air conditioning unit, and then the seller says, actually, we don't have central air, we don't have a unit right now in place, then that would be something that you would want to change right away. And that's why it's important to have the seller, because they know the property better than anybody. The seller shall accurately complete the Ohio residential property disclosure form without assistance from broker or listing agent. Never, ever, ever help with that. Say, I can provide it to you, but it must be only the seller's input, no input from you at all. They
I have a
provide you with,
question.
sure.
Okay, you said, I'm sorry, I think I missed that. I was listening, but I think it kind of went over my head. You said we don't get in, I'm trying to follow along too, but what are we not getting input from? What are we getting input only from the seller on? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear on that part.
Sure, absolutely. The property disclosure. So
Oh, right,
we have to have them fill that out. So you'll
right.
share it in dot loop as fill and sign, giving them fill and sign permissions if you do it that way, or just leave them a paper copy to do it on their own, because we cannot be perceived as having any sway whatsoever as to what they're disclosing and what they're not.
Okay. And you know
Gotcha.
what? Would you be able to show me how to do the fill-in sign when we're, I mean, if you have time, I could do it another day too. Cause
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
think I think I'm kind of not sure. I don't think I've ever done it that way before, but.
So see right here on my screen where it says add people. So let's just say that you're adding Betty Buyer. Then right over here to the right where it says view only, you can do can sign, or you can do fill and sign.
Right. Okay.
When you share with a co-broke, you can do can edit in private. Other than that, I would never suggest that you give a client privileges to edit in private. Okay.
Okay. So, okay, I got it.
And we can always go over that a little bit more too if you have a question another day too. But just for
Right.
reference, that's the basis for how you do that.
Right. Okay.
Okay, and then also same thing with the lead-based paint. If it was built before 1978, disclosing any notices received from local sheriff's office about Ohio sex offender notification law, acknowledging that the seller may be liable to a buyer if known latent defects are not disclosed. Always drill that home with your client. If there's something you know, you need to disclose it, because if they find out that you did not disclose it, but you knew about it, then you can get sued. There can be a ton of issues for you in the future with that. In the event of any claims or causes of action alleging seller's failure to accurately, completely, or timely disclose, the seller shall indemnify and hold broker, its agents, and employees harmless from any such and all such claims, actions, expenses, and damages, including attorney fees. So this is the part that protects you. This says, I told them that they needed to disclose everything that they knew. I didn't know about it, and I am held harmless. The seller warrants that there are no encroachments, pending lawsuits, foreclosures, divorce actions, assessments, tax, utility, mechanic liens, or anything that could prevent or delay seller from providing clear title and occupancy of the property. So here's where they could put, oh, we have, tax liens, or we're working through an estate right now, so it could cause a delay, something of that nature. And you would know, they would know if there was something like that. Okay, page 2. Seller has received and read the consumer guide to agency relationships, because when do we present the consumer guide? Anybody?
At first substantial contact.
That's right. Yep. As soon as, before you're writing a contract for them, if it's a buyer and you're showing them houses, you do that right away. And same with the listing, like technically when you go for a listing appointment, you should have them sign it at that point. Confidentiality. Ohio law requires broker to keep confidential information that the seller designates as such unless disclosure is required by law. So if they said, I would take, this is my lowest number, this is my bottom number that I would take, that's confidential unless they tell you that you can tell the interested party that. If it's a material defect, that's where you are required to still disclose it. Electronics. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a question on that. So I kind of had a situation, this is kind of recent with the house that I just put up on the market. So the seller was kind of, letting me know, of course, that he was pretty flexible. He wants to get it sold, and he's not, trying to, get over asking and all of that, so he was just telling me, how he wanted to handle it, and so an agent that I know has a client who's interested in it and was interested in it even before the house hit the market, which was fine. But me and the other agent did have a conversation, and I did let them know that the seller was negotiable on things, but I didn't go into full detail. You know, is that okay, or should I have asked? Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess he didn't tell me that I couldn't tell someone that he's willing to negotiate, but I guess
I would get permission always.
okay.
Just in the future, make sure that your seller, if they're motivated, say, do I have permission to disclose that you're motivated?
Okay.
That's what I would do.
Got it. Okay. So just ask that up front.
Pretty much the seller,
Okay.
think of the seller as it's their listing and it's their, their house.
Right.
So whatever they give you permission to disclose, that's perfectly fine. Same with like multiple offers and things like that. You're technically supposed to ask the sellers if you have permission to disclose that you're in multiple offers, because some sellers could be concerned that it would scare other people off because they didn't want to be in a bidding war. So the best practice is anything that has to do with disclosing the number of offers. If they tell you, you can tell them that they have an offer for 200,000. You can tell buyer's agents that. But it's all about negotiating and explaining with your seller what the implication could be of sharing that information. And whatever they want you to share, that's fine. They could say, we will not take an offer under list price, and you could disclose that. So it's all up to the seller in that case. Any other questions on that?
I have one more. So basically a scenario, if it comes up where you have multiple offers, right, on a house, then if the agent is calling me, of course, which I call agents and ask questions sometimes, but like if I'm the buyer's agent. So if they're calling me, asking me questions and saying, hey, do you have any other offers? So I can't tell them unless the seller, I just have to tell them I'll have to get back with you, or will you just kind of like, I know how to sidestep a question, but you know what I mean? Is that how you have to handle it then?
I cover that with the sellers when we're going over the listing paperwork. I say,
okay.
If we get into multiple offers, do I have your permission to disclose that we're in multiple offers, basically?
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. All right, moving on, electronic surveillance. So this is whether they have surveillance equipment on the property, because Ohio law does prohibit a seller from using electronic, mechanical, or any other device to listen, record, or otherwise require content of the oral communications of anyone without their consent. And because it's impractical to obtain such consent from all parties, the seller shall disable the audio function on any surveillance device in advance of any access of the property by third parties. This is something I go over pretty heavily with my buyers as well. And I always tell them, just assume that you're being watched and listened to, because even though you're not supposed to be, watching is fine, but listening to, it's supposed to be turned off, but just to protect your buyers when you're out in houses as well. That's just a good practice. But this informs the seller that they are not supposed to have audio. Excluded fixtures. So this is anything that is attached to the property or affixed to the property that does not convey. So chandeliers, any curtains that are there, any anything like that is attached to the property, or anything that any appliances that would be expected to convey. Next paragraph, home warranty. That's pretty straightforward, whether or not they choose to offer one. Point of sale inspections. If municipal or county point of sale, rental, or any other inspections of the property are required in connection with the listing or sale of the property, the seller shall promptly arrange for them at seller's expense, provide the listing agent with complete results and/or compliance certificate, and deposit the same into escrow before title transfer at the time of any sale. So this means that basically that they're getting any point of sale or city required inspections completed, and then providing title company with the results of that sale, because title cannot transfer without that. Security, insurance, and maintenance. This just states that the seller is still responsible for and liable for the property and its contents, with utility services, property and contents insurance, general maintenance during the term of the agreement. It also states that we are not monitoring or managing the property, and that that's their responsibility. If the property is vacant or unoccupied, they agree to winterize the property to make sure that and ensure that the temperature is properly set to prevent
Katie.
anything. Go ahead.
You're echoing really bad again.
Oh no, how?
I don't know. I mean, it was
That's
kind of
okay.
been going on the whole time, but it's been tolerable, but now it just got really bad again.
I wonder why that's happening. Is that any better?
No.
Do you have like head like earbuds, or you just?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay, right. Sometimes that helps to, but I guess it depends on what
I'll put
device
these
you're
on
on.
and see. I didn't use them yet. Sorry, guys. Okay, is that any better?
That's a little bit better.
Okay, sorry, guys.
Oh, it's still echoing.
Okay. How about that?
Say
Something
say
else.
something else.
Is that working?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
That's better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so let me know if it happens again. I'm sorry, you guys. I don't know why that's happening today. Okay, where were we? We were talking about winterization and making sure that those pipes don't burst. Because
I'm sorry, Katie. I don't want to cut you off. I do have a question on this. I can wait till you're done though.
okay, yeah, let's just get through because we're almost done with this section now.
Okay.
Because third parties may access the property for showings, inspections, appraisals, etc., seller shall store, remove, and or secure all valuables during the term of this agreement. Seller hereby releases broker and agents from all claims, injuries, damages, and causes of action relating to or arising from the foregoing exclusive obligations of the seller. So basically, this just means that we're not liable for anything in the property. Leah, do you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to know, when do you all suggest that a home should be winterized? Obviously, it's cold now, so when do you? I mean, because it's vacant, and it may, be vacant for a while, even through the transaction. Even if you get an offer, it's still going to be vacant. So
Yeah, we have a winterization letter in our listing documents, and it gives them the option to either do it or not do it. But then at least we have a disclosure that we told them that it's a good idea. I would recommend starting that now if it's vacant, just because we're probably going to be freezing in the next couple of weeks. The one
Okay.
thing with that is that if then the utilities have to be turned back on for inspections and appraisal. So I would just talk to them about that as well.
Okay, that's true. The water and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So maybe we could hold off a little longer. I don't know, but
Yeah. It depends on also how quickly it's going to sell.
that's true. Okay, so they have to de-winterize it. I mean, you've been doing this a lot. So let's say like dead of winter, it's cold, and you had it winterized. So then when the people come out to inspect it, or what, the inspectors, they have to send somebody over there to unwinterize it, correct? Like to reverse it, and then then they'll have to put it back. Okay, so that's at the seller's expense, of course.
It is.
Okay. Okay.
All right. The broker electronic data security. So this takes the place of our wire fraud addendum. We don't have a separate one now. It's all included, which is nice. The broker, its employees and agents will never ask any party to wire funds or supply confidential information. So if any request is made to the seller, this just lets them know that they should directly contact the party using independently obtained contact information and releasing the broker from any and all claims, damages, and causes of action related to unlawful electronic data security access by a third party. How's the sound?
Totally.
What was that?
Totally fine.
Okay, good. At least we got that figured out. I don't know what's going on. Okay, and then binding agreement. That's the last paragraph. Just that it is a binding agreement and that they retain their independent professionals for legal, tax, inspection, survey, escrow, appraisal, title, or property management advice and services. We're not lawyers, we're not inspectors, we're not title officers, we're not appraisers. So this just states that we're staying in our own lane. Legally binding agreement, and they acknowledge receipt of a copy of this agreement. And it just has a note that if the seller is married, both spouses' signatures shall be included below because of dower rights. Okay, and then they sign it. You put their contact information there, and then don't forget to sign it yourself. And that's the listing agreement. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me well?
I can.
So when you have those commissions, they're like 3% on the first 100,000 and 2.5 or 1.5 on the rest. How do you write that into the contract where it comes to compensation?
So I would do, if it were 3%, I would do 3/2.
And you write the words as well, like 3/2, and then use the numerals in the.
For this part, you only have to worry about doing that because then it'll be spelled out as well in the MLS. But this is just disclosing to the seller kind of what you have decided to offer as cooperation.
So the total still comes then to, because it doesn't come to 7. So how do you write in the upper paragraph?
Right, so the rest of it, you don't have to do anything else. So like, if you have a 7%, you're probably doing a straight 4/3. But say you did, I see what you're saying. So 6% on 100,000 and 4% on remainder is what I would do. And then I would do 6/4.
Excellent. That's what I wanted to clarify, because
Okay,
if you write it like this, it's not going to come to 7% when it comes to dollar
Right.
values, unless you
Right,
do
yeah.
7% and a direct 3.5 split between brokers, right?
yep. Mhm.
In your original example.
Yes, exactly. So what, and again, this changes every time, like this isn't necessarily what it's going to be, but that's an example of how you would write a graduated commission in there.
Excellent, thank you. And the next question that I have, if you take a listing right now in the winter, you said there's a winterizing addendum in
Yes.
in the listing packaging. They have to sign it regardless if they, or do they have to, and let me see, because this one says that they agree to winterize, but you also have to present the addendum?
I would say, let me make sure that we're actually, I don't know if we're actually requiring it or just highly recommending it.
And maybe my
but-
question is not warranted because I'm not familiar with the winterizing.
So here is the winterization addendum here, the winterization letter, and it just states that they acknowledge that KW Living and your name here advise that they have vacant or unoccupied property winterized by a licensed plumber of seller's choice in order to prevent cold weather damage, and that they acknowledge that KW Living and realtors cannot and will not assume any responsibility for monitoring the heat at the property. So based on this advice, the seller makes the following election, either to agree to have the property winterized and subsequently de-winterized by a plumber of seller's choice, or they elect not to winterize the property and assume all responsibility for damage to the property arising from cold weather damage.
That's phenomenal. I understand it now.
Okay, great.
Is there a list of what this winterization actually means for the sellers? Because I don't really know what to tell them that means. If they're not educated, say, what do you mean by winterizing it?
Yeah, so basically, they turn off the water to the house and they put like a special substance into like all the toilets and sinks, basically like an antifreeze. I'm not super familiar with the whole process, but I would say to have them talk to a plumber about it too, that they could answer any questions that they have, since we're also not plumbers, so we're not experts on that too,
Okay, thank you much.
Cool. You're welcome. Anyone else?
Yes, Kady.
Yeah.
Comments? So,
Hi.
hi. So on the listing, on the listing agreement, one of the items that you touched base on was the option of home warranty.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I don't know if you mentioned, we normally recommend America's Preferred Home Warranty when we're offering contracts. And if the sellers elect not to have it, you want to make sure that you fill out the application and have them decline it.
Yeah, very good point, Greg. Very good point. Yes, you always want to have that application for America's Preferred Home Warranty either accepted or waived in your file, just to prove that we told them that it was a good idea to maybe do that. So great point. Thank you for bringing that forward.
And the big reason for that is that in the past, and I don't know if that's still current, they would actually cover your deductible on E&O if there was any suit that would come out of the transaction.
Yes, they will cover our E&O insurance, our deductible. So it's super important to have that.
Right. The other thing that we like to tell our sellers is that when we write an offer for a buyer on a property, if a home warranty is not offered, we normally recommend that they request one paid for by the seller. So even if they have to decline it, that's fine. Just be aware that you may get requested to provide one, and it may not be the one we recommend. It might be one that's more expensive.
Yeah, very good point.
Let them know that one of the advantages of offering the home warranty, obviously, is that something you can advertise to give potential buyers peace of mind, but it also covers them for certain items during the listing period if something should go wrong at no additional cost to them. And we participated in 2 transactions within the last year where the sellers were covered on items that were discovered and went wrong. And in both cases, they received $1,000 towards the repairs, and the warranty cost them $425. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah,
I'm sorry, Katie, I can only understand like every other word that he's saying. I can't really hear.
Yeah, me either.
Okay, so
Could you
basically,
recap?
go ahead, Greg, try it again.
I'll let you go ahead and summarize.
Okay. Okay. So basically what Greg was saying is that with the home warranty, it either has to be waived or accepted. And that's because America's Preferred Home Warranty will cover your deductible if you have an errors and omissions claim filed against you. And they also, at America's Preferred Home Warranty, offer seller coverage for throughout the transaction. I think it's like an extra $75, and it doesn't come out until the closing date. So they are covered throughout the transaction for certain items that could go wrong at no additional cost to them until closing. And Greg was saying that they have had a couple of transactions where that has actually come in handy for their sellers. So very good points. Thank you for sharing that.
And that was the base coverage. That was not without the seller's additional. They're covered for certain items just with the 425 basic.
Oh,
They can upgrade for an additional 75 to get coverage on some additional items. And it's good to familiarize yourself with that in the warranty, because a lot of times they'll ask, well, what's it really do? Just
Yeah.
it's
yeah, very good. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, the basic coverage does some things for the seller as well. Any other questions on this document before we move on?
Just scroll back to the first page. I want to capture the top of the document. Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I just wanted to capture the top of the document. Excellent. Thank you. I'm good.
Oh, okay. All set?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, moving on to our purchase agreement, our offer to purchase. Okay, just updated, as you can see, in September of this year. So the buyer here, and then the address for the property. So Betty buyer is going to buy 123 Main Street in Solon, Ohio. And then here's where you would put your parcel number, whatever it is listed on the MLS and on the auditor site. This is where you say that the buyer is accepting it in as is physical condition, including latent defects, including all rights, privileges, easements, everything that is attached to the property, all electrical, heating, air conditioning, plumbing, and bathroom fixtures, window and door shades, blinds, awnings, all of that. Curtain and drapery fixtures are included unless stated otherwise. Disposal, garage door openers, and all controls, attached carpeting. And then you can check off these items based on what's in the MLS, or if it says something like washer and dryer are negotiable, then you could check those here as stating that you would like those to be there with your offer. All the stuff about the fireplace, all existing window treatments, ceiling fans, all of these items. So it's really important to double check and make sure that you are accurate with what's in the MLS. And then unless otherwise agreed by the parties, fixtures affixed to the property are presumed to be conveyed but to the buyer, chattel or personal possessions not affixed to the property that are excluded unless listed below. So chattel included, so like, let's say they were keeping the lawn equipment at the property. Every once in a while, you'll have that. Something like this. Fixtures excluded. So let's say that they are keeping the dining room chandelier and the refrigerator in kitchen does not convey with the property because they just bought it and they think it's really cool and they want to take it with them. Okay, secondary offer. This would come into play if it was a secondary offer, which means that it's already under contract and you are writing an offer as a backup. So generally, I mean, sometimes you'll write a secondary offer. And if you do, this just states that it will become the primary contract upon the buyer's receipt of a signed copy of the release of the previous primary contract on or before. And so like, say they say that they'll wait a week. They want to see if inspections go well, if those, or if people get cold feet, something like that. They're saying that they would still be interested in making an offer on this property through that date. Buyer may terminate the secondary contract at any time before the buyer's receipt of the release of the primary contract by delivering written notice to the seller or seller's agent. So if they get to Wednesday and they said that they were going to keep it until Saturday, then they could, and they found a property on that Wednesday, and you could just say, hey, we are letting you know that we no longer wish to be thought of as a secondary offer for this property. They found something else. Okay, price. Here's where you would put your purchase price. So let's just say it's $150,000. Okay, earnest money shall be deposited in non-interest bearing trust account with the escrow agent identified below within 4 days from the date of acceptance as defined herein and credited against the purchase price. Paid by wired funds. That's a new addition, which is really nice to have because that happens a lot. Check made payable to the escrow agent or the note, which is the promissory note. A lot of agents don't really like to accept that, but I think of it as a placeholder, especially if they're going to be wiring. So earnest money is whatever your client decides that it is. Sometimes people do a little bit more, sometimes people do a little bit less, but it's usually between 1% and 2%, I would say. Okay, cash down payment. I always recommend putting percentages here so that you don't have to change and go back and forth if the purchase price changes in negotiations. So I would say, like if they think they're going to put 20% down, but they might do a little bit more, or if they think they're going to put, they know they're going to put at least 10% down, but they might do more, I would say at least 10%. And then mortgage loan, I would say up to 90%. You'll
Kady,
select.
Acceptable to put in a TBD to be determined and balance contract. We've written them that way.
Yeah, I do that a lot too, but some listing agents don't like that.
Okay.
So just this is another alternative if they say, you know,
Okay,
that they want something else to be written in. But I just recommend never putting the actual amounts in there because that can change so much, especially if you're negotiating the price back and forth. Mortgage loan to be obtained. Okay, is it conventional, FHA, VA, cash, or other? Other, or it could be a hard money loan. Other could be USDA. And so that just gives you an option to write that in there. Now, in terms of closing costs, we don't currently have somewhere to write that. So if you are asking for closing costs, I would add a text box right here and say seller to provide maybe 2,500 toward buyer closing costs prepaid points. So that's where you can put that if that is the case. The parties hereby direct the escrow agent to confirm receipt of the earnest money by delivering written notice to the party's real estate agents or to the party directly if they are not represented. Ohio law requires the escrow agent deposits in excess of $10,000 to be conveyed by wire transfer. Okay. Electronic data security. So again, we have that wire fraud addendum incorporated right into our offer to purchase now. So this is basically the same verbiage as in our listing agreement that we just went through, where we are not held liable and that they should independently confirm their requests with independently obtained contact information.
So Katie, Florian here, really quickly.
Yes.
So the fraud addendum is no longer recommended with an offer with this new purchase?
It's no longer needed because it's in our documents now.
Fantastic, thanks.
Yep. Financing. This offer is conditioned upon the buyer making written application for the above mortgage loan within. So typically I would say 7 days or 5 days, depending on when you do it. So if it's a Friday and you're writing the offer and it gets accepted on that Friday, that takes 2 days out where a lot of lenders aren't going to be doing applications. So just base it on the time of week that you're doing it as well. If you're writing an offer on a Monday, it's probably very possible that they can get that application done within that 5 days, but I do 7 days a lot. Using good faith efforts to obtain written commitment for that loan. So I typically do this for about a week before the closing date. So today is November 20th. If we're writing the offer today and we would close, we've got a couple holidays in there. Oh boy, we've got a lot of holidays. I would probably push it to this next week if I were writing an offer today, depending on the type of loan and type of transaction, obviously. But I would say probably like the 29th. And so that would be our closing date. So that would mean that the 22nd would be the loan commitment date.
So Kady, I have a question. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So with that, I have 2 questions actually, if you could, just on this part. The only reason why I knew to put the 5 days is because that's what someone had told me originally when I was first doing this, of course, but I never had like a real explanation on it with the 5 days. So basically after the offer has been accepted, basically when they say the written loan application, you know, with the mortgage loan officer or whatever, that means that everything is like submitted with the loan officer. Is that what you mean? Like the written application, like with the actual, the lender?
Yes. So they know that they're buying this particular house and they're starting the process with that.
Right, within 5 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, like five days is obviously best, but depending on the day you're writing the offer, you might want to change that by a couple days because it's days, not business days.
Oh, okay. That's just days. Okay. Okay. And then the closing, I mean, the commitment for that loan, that's like 30 days out, I guess, or 45 days if you know, for it to close.
Yeah, usually at least like I give usually the week before I would expect to close. And with this particular situation, because we have 2 holiday days here for Thanksgiving and the day after, a lot of people aren't working. And then we also have Christmas holiday in there as well. So that's why I stretched that out a little bit more. But if it were typical, then I would say that you would want to close on this 21st or something like that and have your commitment by the 14th, something of that nature.
Right. But this is business days though, this one, correct? Or no? Or no, this one is just days.
No, and it's just the date. Yeah.
This is just days. Okay.
So if the buyer does not timely obtain a written loan commitment, then the agreement is null and void, and the parties shall promptly sign a mutual release authorizing the earnest money to be returned to the buyer, because we have that financing contingency that protects the buyer in this case. In the event of a dispute regarding earnest money, Ohio law requires the escrow agent to hold it in its trust account until the escrow agent receives written mutual authorization of both parties specifying disbursement or a court order directing disbursement. Okay, closing. All funds and documents necessary to complete this agreement will be placed in escrow on, so this is what title company. So we'll just write in Ohio Real Title, since we have a relationship with them at our office, on or before. So this is where you would put your actual closing date. So let's just say it's a normal time with not holidays, and we'll say that it's the 21st. And then typically I put the title transfer date for the next day, just because a lot of times, depending on when people sign, it's difficult to get a same day title transfer a lot of times. Okay, walkthrough. The buyer can walk through. I always do like 1 to 3 days, just because I think that gives you a good window before title transfer, solely to verify that it is in the same or similar condition, absent normal wear and tear. If they conduct a walkthrough, they're not going to raise issues about the condition of the property if it existed when the buyer last viewed or inspected it. If there is evidence of material adverse change in the property's condition, the buyer shall promptly notify the seller and escrow agent in writing of the material adverse change, and they agree to either give the buyer a credit or repair the damage, or for sums to be withheld in escrow. And if the buyer does not conduct a walkthrough, it is the buyer's absolute waiver of it and acceptance of the property in as is condition. So it's really important that you remind your buyer to schedule that walkthrough. But also if you remind them and they choose not to do it, they are accepting it as is. Possession. Okay, so possession, we always want to be on that date of title transfer.
Hey, I
Sorry,
have a question about the walkthrough. I'm sorry,
Sure.
I was a minute late or a second late there. Is it typical to write a release of contingency after the walkthrough, or that's not needed after the successful completion of the walkthrough? What do you recommend?
Technically, it should be done. I would say typically it is not done, but technically it should be there. And especially if you have a transaction where you feel like maybe the buyers aren't happy, or it's been there have been problems throughout, I would definitely recommend having them. I would add a box to your release of contingency form in the part where it says other, and I would add walkthrough and have them initial that.
I've always done it, and in my last transaction, the listing agent said they don't see that, they don't recommend it, so I actually haven't done it, but I've done it consistently, and that's a new scenario. I just wanted to check and kind of like get some clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's technically supposed to be done, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it probably doesn't happen.
Thank you.
Okay. So we want that to be, I usually say 0 days after the recording of the deed, transferring the property from seller to buyer, or, so this would be on 12/22, whichever is later, and that the buyer will transfer utilities commencing on the date of possession. So it's important to remind your people to do that. Okay, title. Seller shall convey marketable title to the buyer by general warranty deed or fiduciary deed if required. Release of dower, clear of all liens and encumbrances except the mortgage assumed by the buyer. Restrictions, conditions, easements, and encroachments that do not materially adversely affect the use or value of the property. Zoning ordinances, if any. Taxes and assessments, both general and special, not yet due and payable. The seller furnishes an owner's fee policy of title insurance from the escrow agent for the purchase price. And then that is split evenly between the seller and buyer. That's the customary practice in our state. The sellers have 30 days after written notice to remove title defects. If they're not able to do so, they can accept the title subject to the defect without the reduction in purchase price or terminate the agreement. And if they elect to terminate this agreement, the parties agree to sign a mutual release authorizing the earnest money to be returned to the buyer. Title is complicated. So I am not an expert by any means, but we have awesome resources as well for that. Prorations. Tenant security deposits credited to the buyer through escrow, rents, if any, taxes and assessments, and homeowners association fees and assessments prorated to by the escrow agent as of the date of title transfer. So this basically is just saying all of the things that are due for that property up through closing will be credited to the buyer at closing to ensure that they're not paying for a time that they weren't there. Reserving sufficient funds in escrow. And then the escrow agent is instructed to release the balance of the funds on reserve upon notice from the county auditor that taxes on the land and improvements have been paid in full to the date of title transfer. So the escrow agent, here's the water hold. I see, typically about $250, depending on where it is. If it's a property that has well and septic, obviously this would be not applicable because there is no water and sewer charge. So it just depends on the situation, but I've seen $250 seems to be pretty typical. And then for the agricultural tax recoupment, this is so rare, but I always just say that the seller is going to pay for that. I've actually never had that happen. I don't know if anybody else has.
Do you have to check that box? I never checked it before, but.
I am of the opinion that checking it is better than not checking it in terms of literally everything. So even if you write not applicable, like if it's so here, for instance, for home warranty, if it's not happening, I would write not applicable in there instead of just leaving it blank. So
Okay.
my opinion is just to say it's seller because it probably won't matter. And in this case, when you're writing up an offer to purchase, you're protecting the buyer. And so it would be better for the seller to have to pay that if it were an issue.
Okay.
Okay, charges and escrow instructions. This agreement shall be used as escrow instructions subject to the escrow agent's standard conditions of acceptance. So the seller is paying the real estate transfer tax, any amount required to discharge any loans or liens or encumbrances that are not the buyer's, a title exam and 1/2 of the insurance premium for title insurance, any prorations, the broker's commissions, 1/2 of the escrow, and then utility charges through the date of possession or title transfer, whichever is later. Tenant security deposits credited in escrow to the buyer. Then it goes through what the buyer pays. So 1/2 of the escrow fee, 1/2 of the insuring premiums, all recording fees for the deed and mortgage. The buyer's agent commission is comprised of 2 components, the cooperative compensation payable from the listing brokerage. And then this is that $200 transaction fee that your client, when it's the buyer, your client pays that as well. Okay. Here's the home warranty section. So let's just say they're doing it and you would put in America's Preferred home warranty at a cost of, ours is about $425 to be paid by seller. Let's just say they're doing that. And this is important and new to our agreement as of September. The parties acknowledge that a limited warranty does not cover pre-existing defects and requires a buyer to pay a deductible in the event of a claim. And the buyer, broker and or its agents may receive a fee from the warranty provider. So it's good. That gives us a little extra protection.
Kady?
Yeah.
It's great. Back up just 1 second, please. To the previous paragraph. On the $200 fee. Agents have the ability to customize that.
Yes.
If they want to build in a transaction fee, if they're paying a transaction coordinator, that can be customized.
Yeah, that's very true.
The office will customize the document for the agent so that you have your own version of this with the correct or a different fee in there, whatever you choose to charge.
Yep. Thanks, Greg. Very true.
People ask us what that is, and we say, well, our brokerage charges the fee to house the documents for a period of years. We're required by the state to do that, and it also provides for processing, and the cost involved with processing the transactions is how we explain it to the seller.
Yeah, and typically teams do have a different fee there.
Yep.
The same paragraph, Kady, can you explain what that number 1 there, the cooperative compensation payable from the listing brokerage? What is that exactly?
So that is the commission that is offered in the MLS. So when you're the buyer's agent and you're being paid by the listing side, that this is just disclosing to your buyer that you are being paid and how that's happening.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, the fun part, inspections. We all love talking about inspections. So this is like a pretty important part of our purchase agreement. Okay, so this agreement is subject to buyer inspections as elected below, which shall be conducted by an independent professional inspector of buyer's exclusive choice within a specified number of days from the date of acceptance as herein defined. And while we may suggest or refer inspectors or contractors to the buyer is solely responsible for choosing and retaining any inspector, contractor, or other service provider. The buyer acknowledges that the waiver of any inspection or evaluation is against the advice of us as the broker and realtor. And buyers are advised that real property may have latent defects and conditions, so they must inspect and make due diligent inquiry about the property, including land, dwelling, and improvements. They shall inspect and evaluate all aspects of the property and retain independent professionals to do so on their behalf. And when it's applicable, the buyer shall retain a general home inspector licensed by the state of Ohio. Very important that it is a licensed home inspector because that is a new law that has been put into place in Ohio, that the home inspector can no longer just be ASHI certified or INTERNACHI certified. They must be licensed by the state, which I think is a great move. Buyers shall review public records and consult with local and county government about the property, including without limitation as to the buyer's intended use. So if they want to sell some type of good out of their house, they need to make sure that they're actually allowed to do that. And that's not your responsibility to find out. Or if it's a rural property or even if it's not rural, but there's a little bit of land and they want to have chickens, that's a big thing right now. They are required to find that out and investigate that on their own. Buyer shall carefully review seller's representations and disclosures and make inquiry of seller if additional information is deemed necessary for due diligence. The buyer shall not rely upon any written or verbal representations of the broker and agent. Buyer agrees to hold the broker and agent involved in this agreement harmless from any and all claims, actions, injuries, or damages related to the property after title transfer. Inspections required by any state, county, local government, and or FHA and VA, including the FHA appraisal and any municipal point of sale inspections, do not replace their inspection. So here's where you would select which inspections your client would like to do. So general home inspection, 7 days is pretty typical, and that's typically at the buyer's expense. We're just going to say that it's not septic and well. Radon, it's good to see if the inspector can drop off the radon detector earlier, just to allow you to have those results a little sooner, because you want to make sure you stay within these dates. So sometimes I'll put 10 here just to make sure that there's time for those results to come back. And then I always say that you will have other inspections, maybe within 10 days as well, as recommended by the general home inspector. Okay.
I have a question. So the radon, I haven't done one of those yet. I just have done the general home. Is that something that they would recommend after you get the regular home inspection, or is that just a separate inspection that the buyers may want to get?
That is just separate because there's no way for the inspector. So these ones recommended, that would be if they see evidence of possible wood destroying insects, or they see possible mold, or they see a possible structural issue. Radon, there's no way for them to know that without doing the test. So if they would like a radon test, they need to ask for that right off the bat.
Do you recommend a radon test? Because I haven't been.
I always recommend it.
You do?
I always,
okay.
Yeah, I do. Because I don't want that liability of them saying, well, you said it was no big deal, and then finding out later that, they have to get a mitigation system. So
And
it's,
how much is a radon test typically? I mean, just off the top that you know about. 'Cause I'm not
well, a lot of times general home inspectors offer it in addition. And so they usually will bundle that together, but I think it's about 150 if I remember correctly.
okay.
Good. All right, so for waiver, this is the buyer waiving every inspection that they have not elected to do, and that states that they are waiving it and they are accepting the property in as-is condition.
Hey, Katie,
Yes.
it's Greg again. I
Hi.
know you passed over the septic and well.
Mhm.
I don't know how many of the agents online here are writing offers in Geauga County, but in Geauga County, the majority of the homes here have septic and well.
Mhm.
In case of a septic system, the seller has to pay for that inspection. And we always make sure that we include the Geauga County septic addendum that's part of the templates, and also there's information on how to apply for to get the system inspected, because it's really important. If you don't have a passing septic inspection, the seller is going to be required to escrow up to possibly 1.5 times the cost of a replacement system at closing, and those funds would not be available to them if they haven't had it inspected, or if they haven't been able to get the buyer to assume the septic.
Right.
It's really important that the sellers understand what the county requirements are. So we always include, if it is a septic system, we always include the instructions from the county on how to get it inspected, and have them actually initial the document as part of the contract. And that way there's no surprises down the road that all of a sudden they are escrowing funds, or they have to only up money for additional costs. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Greg. I think we should do a whole separate class just on septic and well, because I think that if you are working out in Geauga County and some parts of Summit County even, there are a lot of places that have septic and well. So yeah, Greg was basically just saying, in case his audio went a little weird again, but basically he was saying that we have a separate addendum for Geauga County septic, and also that the seller could be required to escrow those funds if it does not pass. So there are a lot of things with septic, and I do think we should have like a whole class just on that.
Okay, just to touch on that real quick, I bought and sold a home with septic and well, and especially our loan was a VA loan. There
Mhm.
are specific requirements for a VA loan when it comes to septic and well, that the seller has to pay certain for those inspections. And a lot of times sellers don't know that, and they'll try and bundle that into their closing costs or into adding it to the loan, even though it's not super expensive. But also in Summit County, you have to have the inspection done and recorded prior to the closure as part of your contingencies. So
Yeah.
it was something I didn't know at the time, and it almost ruined my sale because I didn't know that the inspection needed done. So yeah, I think it's definitely something worth mentioning.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. All right. Within 3 days from the date that the last inspection is completed, the buyer shall elect only one of the following options. Okay, so they're removing the inspection contingency and accepting it as is. That's what we all love. We want that. That's like the best case scenario. B, accepting the properties subject to seller's repair of specific conditions or defects identified in a written inspection report by a professional inspector or contractor, which then we get into negotiations. Or C, they terminate the agreement if the written inspection report identifies material latent defects not previously disclosed in writing by the seller and or any broker or agent. So that's within 3 days of the last completed inspection. So it's very important to make sure that you're staying within that timeline, because if you get past that, the listing agent could just say, well, you're outside of your contingency, so your client's going to go ahead and accept this as is.
And what if the client doesn't want to do that? Then they can terminate
They can, and they might have to fight for their earnest money at that point. It just depends
Oh,
on how the
yeah.
transaction has been going. But all that to say, it's just really important to make sure that you're following the dates and deadlines and being in good communication with the listing agent throughout this process.
Okay.
Okay, so if the property is accepted as is, present physical condition, the buyer shall sign an amendment to purchase agreement, removing the inspection contingencies, and this agreement will proceed in full force and effect. So that's the fun one where we don't have to do too much extra work on that. If the property is accepted subject to seller's repair of specific defects, buyer shall provide seller with a copy of the inspection reports and an amendment to purchase agreement identifying the defects to be repaired. The parties shall have 3 days from the seller's receipt of the written list of defects and the inspection reports to agree in writing which defects, if any, will be corrected at the seller's expense. If the parties do not agree in writing as to the repairs within those 3 days, then this agreement is deemed null and void, and the parties shall promptly sign a mutual release authorizing the earnest money to be returned to the buyer. So this is what protects your buyer if they can't come to an agreement. And then if the buyer elects to terminate the agreement based on newly discovered material latent defects in the property, the buyer shall provide a copy of the written inspection report to the seller, and the parties shall promptly sign a mutual release authorizing earnest money to be released to the buyer. So this just proves that to them that there are major things wrong with this property, and that's why we're backing out.
Mm-hmm.
Parties may modify dates for inspections, repairs, or the deadline for exercising their right to terminate the agreement by mutual written agreement. So again, this is where that communication comes in, staying in contact with the listing agent, not being like, I know our deadline is coming up. Can we please extend it? We're waiting on this. We're waiting on a quote, whatever the case may be. Upon buyer's request, seller shall provide reasonable access for buyer to review any repairs made by the seller. Any failure by buyer to request review of their repairs before title transfer is deemed absolute waiver of the review and acceptance of the property as is. Okay, so here's where you would select if they were going to do the pest and wood destroying insect inspection. So depending on if it's a VA loan, obviously then the seller has to pay for that inspection. And then all repairs and treatment expense shall be paid by whichever party, unless FHA or VA regulations, it says right here, prohibit payment by the buyer, in which case the seller shall bear the cost. And this agreement can be terminated if the repair and treatment exceeds $500. Lead-based paint, typically this is going to be a no. It's extremely expensive and time consuming to do a lead-based paint assessment, but you do want to make sure that you have that, that disclosure if the home was built before 1978. So then on line 210, the buyer has received a copy of the EPA pamphlet and a copy of the disclosure, or if they haven't, then, you know, I always say within 1 day from receipt of the offer that we would have access to that. Megan's Law, that's the sex offender stuff, and that is your buyer's due diligence to find that out. Condition of the property. The buyer has examined the property and agrees to purchase it in as-is physical condition, including latent defects and defects disclosed on the property disclosure. And then the seller shall notify the buyer in writing of any additional defects or disclosure items that arise between the date of acceptance and the recording of the deed. Okay, so this is if they have received the property disclosure. And again, if they have not, then you want to get that for them pretty quickly. So I always say within, you know, 1 or 2 days. The seller shall deliver possession of the property in broom clean condition, free and clear of all debris and chattel. So this is just covering them for the walkthrough so that they don't leave it an absolute mess. Seller shall pay all costs for repair of any gas line leak between the street and foundation at the time of transfer of utilities. And seller complies with all governmental point of sale laws and ordinances. Buyer shall inquire directly with the applicable government if they wish to review any point of sale information or public records. Seller represents that they have not received any government notices about building code or health and safety violations except as already disclosed. If there were more, then you could address that here. If there was something where there was a known building code. If they cannot agree in writing in that time period, then the agreement may be declared null and void. So you can see there, it pretty much covers everything to make sure that every possible scenario is covered so that you know what the next step is. And so the most important thing is to always go back to the contract and read it. Representations and disclaimers, they have, the seller has completed the property disclosure without assistance and releasing and holding harmless all brokers and agents from claims, actions, injuries, or damages relating to the property or misrepresentations or omissions of the seller. The buyer understands and agrees that the buyer, the broker, and agents do not verify or investigate sellers' disclosures, including those made on the Ohio Residential Property Disclosure. They're not relying on any written or verbal representations. Features, characteristics, improvements, multiple listing service descriptions, use, value, all of these things, special assessments, any of that. So damage, if the improvements to the property are damaged in excess of 10% of the purchase price before title transfer, then the buyer may accept insurance proceeds if it's less than 10% or terminate. And then if it's less than 10%, then the seller shall restore the property to its prior condition. So here's where you'll put everything that is required to go along with it. So your agency disclosure form always, the property disclosure form, if it's VA, if it's FHA, if it's FHA. By the way, I recommend having this form for your protection, get a home inspection filled out no matter what, because it protects you, especially in the event that they decide not to get an inspection. So I always include that as well, even if it's not FHA. Condominium addendum, if it's applicable. If there's a contingent home sale going on, there's an addendum for that. A concurrency going on, there's an addendum for that, clad-based paint, and then other. So if you had an escalation addendum, if you had some other type of like blank addendum talking about, or like, extended possession or anything like that, that would be included there. And then again, just go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kady. I just have a quick question. I had someone told me before, like prior, like a while back, that if you leave those blank, like the addendum related documents, just because, I guess you may not know what ones you're gonna need. It doesn't box you in. Is that
except
right?
You're always gonna need the agency disclosure form and like the disclosures. So I would at least check those.
Okay.
Things that, but I would say be careful about putting too many things in here because then the lender could be like, can I see it? So
I know. Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah, but things that you would do no matter what, there's no reason not to.
Okay.
All right, binding agreement, again, same verbiage as pretty much as before, terms and covenants, provisions, delivery and recording of the deed. Just that it's a binding contract and that the parties are advised to review it carefully before signing it and consult independent legal counsel if they have more questions of law. Buyer seller signatures, earnest money deposit receipt. Never ever sign this unless you have a physical check or promissory note in your hand. Otherwise, because then they could say if for some reason the earnest money never gets delivered or they just fail to submit it, then they could say, well, you said you had it. And then you could get in trouble and you don't want to do that. So this is only if you have a physical check in your hand or if you have the promissory note. And then seller acceptance. This is where it says that they will pay from their proceeds. The seller will pay from their proceeds the commission agreed with the seller's brokerage, which includes the cooperative compensation offered by the seller's brokerage to the buyer's brokerage through the multiple listing service. And then have the seller sign. You put your information, they'll put the listing agent information there. Put the listing information here. You'll put your name here. So I'll just put myself and my license number. And we have this pre-filled for you for the KW Living and the broker number. And that's it.
Hey, Katie,
Yes.
I had one that, the sale was contingent, on selling their current home to get
Mhm.
these funds. So where do they indicate that on this? So if I have someone that's got to sell their house to get the down payment, of course, where does
There's a
that
separate
get?
addendum for that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So if that's the case, they have to mark that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll go back and
Sometimes
look.
some people don't have, like, not every brokerage has all of these addendums necessarily. And you might see somewhere it's just written on a blank addendum that this sale is contingent on the sale of this property by this date or something of that nature. But it's
Right.
best to use the addendums that are prepared, because anytime you add verbiage, you could be accused of trying to practice law. So we just need to be careful with that.
Okay.
Anything else?
I have a question real
Sure.
quick. On line 240 up, where, under where it says reviewed sellers Ohio residential disclosure, like by, if the buyer has or has not received it.
Mhm.
So underneath there with the number of days, how many days should go in there I missed that part.
On line 240 about,
Yeah.
this is about building code and health or safety violations.
Do we leave that blank?
So I would say, unless you have, I would talk to the listing agent about this in each case. Because it says, if applicable, buyer and seller shall have blank days after receipt by buyer of all notices to agree in writing which party will be responsible for the correction of any building code or health violations. So this could also be point of sale as well. So,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you give enough time to be able to. So this is like the buyer and seller receive the results of a point of sale inspection, or they're notified of a building code or health violations. You basically just want to build a little bit of time in there in order to be able to negotiate those
Can
and
you
figure
leave
out who's
that
paying.
blank? Can you leave that blank and then just do an addendum? Like, probably so, right?
Yeah, I would just,
Because I don't remember checking that off, but I don't know.
yeah, I would say that if you don't know of anything, then just
Right.
leave it and then address it at that point. But if there is a known point of sale, and the point of sale results are not back yet, then I would say that you would want to put something in there to protect your client.
What's reasonable on the point of sale, like getting things corrected? 'Cause sometimes things are slow a little bit, and it just, that can kind of
Right.
hold up the deal.
Yeah. So, honestly, that's something that I'm not 100% sure how to advise you on.
Okay.
So I'll check into that and see what anybody else would recommend. Because typically, like I said, if you already have the results, then that could be pretty quick. But if you're waiting for results, it is the days after receipt. So I would say similar to like the home inspection, when you get the home inspection results and you have 3 days to decide, I would say
Right.
that's pretty reasonable. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Right, because it's basically just saying which party is going to be responsible for correcting it, basically. So
Right.
that's all you're really agreeing to.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I do have one more if nobody else. I don't want to just keep
I
asking, but I
saw
need.
Florian unmute. Let's see if
Oh, go
Florian
ahead.
has something real quick.
I wanted to thank you for this presentation. It was very good. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Florian. I appreciate you guys jumping on a Saturday morning. I wasn't sure if I was going to be here by myself.
And Kady, I just had one more quick thing, really. This
Sure.
was excellent, and it helped me because, sometimes we don't read everything. We need to, I need to be better
Yeah.
at reading the fine print, honestly. But on line 197, I kind of missed that too when you went over it. It kind of went quick, and I think I may have, but where it says lead-based paint, I think I typically have been checking no, and that's like most of the time people are not asking for a lead-based paint.
Yeah, it's a pretty cost prohibitive and time consuming inspection. And so I would say that if there's a situation where this needs to be done, you would know.
Okay.
Typically at this point, it's been covered over or, disclosed that you already know it's there. So
Right.
I would say typically, I've never checked yes for that.
Right, okay, that's good. I just wanted to double check because I missed that part.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. It looks like the sun is coming out. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Saturday.
You
Thank
too.
you. You
Thank
too.
you, Katie. Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.